To all of you who've been affected by the California wildfires, we're sending our deepest sympathies and prayers.
Our California community has been stunned by the unfathomable disasters around us, but it has been incredible to see the strength, love, support, and resilience of our people.
As we begin to clean up, recover, regroup, and rebuild, there will be situations where documentation, legal papers, and notarizations will be needed. So we wanted to take just a few moments to provide helpful information for those of you who might need a notary, and also some helpful tips for our notaries who might have been affected by the fires or who are there to support the community. You're tuned in to Beyond the Stamp with the National Notary Association. I'm Susi Sivkov, and I'm joined today by Nicola Jackson, Director of Training Education, and Brooke Merritt, Senior Manager of Policy Planning. Thank you so much for joining us. You're all the way on the East Coast, but you're a part of the National Notary Association. You lived here with us in California for a while, and so you kind of know what we're going through right now. You know, we wanted to make sure that we could communicate with folks who are going to be rebuilding. They'll need notaries, and so we also wanted to communicate to our notaries out there who will be supporting these efforts. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to start by talking about what signers need to know when it comes to what notaries can and cannot do. Because when they're told, hey, you got to go get this notarized, what does that actually mean, and how can they be prepared and get it done as efficiently and as expeditiously as possible? So Nicola, when a signer is told that they need a document notarized, what does that actually mean? What is the overarching purpose of the notarization? Talk to us about that.
I mean, notaries are there to, in some cases witness signatures, but really the main role is to authenticate identity. Ultimately, what the notary is going to do is make sure that the correct person is signing the document, and that's why they're appearing in front of this impartial person. So, in some cases, the Notarial Act's going to require them to say they witnessed the signature, they're making sure no one's coercing them into signing, and that's why it's typically used in fields where important life transactions are happening.
Now, Brooke, I know that you work with policy and planning, kind of in between government and notaries. And so can you tell us a little bit about what types of documents signers may encounter during a time of recovery like this? What kind of important transactions may need to be notarized?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we think of a natural disaster, that's something that's going to completely upend someone's life and create an extraordinary amount of personal property damage, loss of income, potentially health challenges, and just other drastic changes. So there's a lot of paperwork. So some specific documents that come to mind, a lot of insurance claims forms and related documents. So if somebody has homeowners insurance, renter's insurance, auto insurance, some claim forms for disaster-related damages may require notarization. There may be an affidavit involved if there's a need for a sworn statement specifically describing losses or damages that were incurred. I also think of powers of attorney. So some folks may need to appoint someone to act on their behalf, and that may also happen in the form of healthcare directives, right? So someone may need to appoint someone to make medical related decisions on their behalf. Really, with the California wildfires in particular, I think of loan documents or loan modification documents. So obviously we've seen a lot of loss of homes and businesses. So what happens if there's a mortgage on a property or other loan that someone is paying? So you may have someone who has a mortgage, but now the home is no longer there. What happens in that case? Or you may have someone whose home was spared, but now they have no job or business, so there's a loss of income. So various lenders and government agencies have different relief options for addressing loan repayment in these unusual types of circumstances. And so a lot of those documents for businesses, there may be a need to change ownership. So there are documents related to that. And really, when we think about identity and documents that some folks may have lost, a lot of these documents have been destroyed. So some folks may need to request copies of vital records like their birth certificate or a marriage certificate to help them along in the rebuilding process.
So you mentioned requesting for vital records, certified copies of vital records. And so this is something that comes up on the hotline a lot. Notaries can't certify the copies of birth certificate. They can't issue those certified copies, correct?
Correct, because when somebody has their birth certificate in hand, what they are holding is a certified copy. So the notarial act of copy certification is certifying that it's a copy of the original, so you can't certify a copy of a copy. Now what you can do though is notarize someone's signature on an application to get a certified copy from the agency that has the original. So it's an important distinction because that form can be notarized requesting it. It's just the actual act of, I say this one and this one are the same, that we can't do. And the good news is the notary wording's built into the application, so there's no guesswork there. You just follow the instructions on the document and perform whatever notarization that they're requesting.
Now, speaking of things that notaries cannot do, it's also important that you all know the limits of a notary. Notaries are not attorneys, typically. They are not authorized to give legal advice of any kind. They can't help you fill in your documents. They can't give you advice on how to proceed or what type of they can't prescribe documents. They cannot tell you what type of notarization you need. So we do have limitations as notaries. The unauthorized practice of law can put a notary at a whole new level of liability and risk. And so it's important that when you're talking to these agencies who are requesting certain documents be notarized, that you're prepared to bring the document to the notary as a complete document.
And there may be some back and forth too, because the notary is not going to be able to answer certain questions, and you may have to call back whoever's asking you to get this notarized to get more information for the notary, which can be kind of, frustrating and time consuming because you're trying to get this done to accomplish the next step in the process. But unfortunately, those are the restrictions that we have.
Well, and if you put it in perspective, like if there's a blank for where the beneficiary's name goes, or an interest rate, or a sum of money for an insurance claim, if that line is left blank and then it's notarized, that could leave the document open to a lot more liability, and it could leave you at risk that maybe a fraudulent name could be put in that beneficiary space, a fraudulent amount in the insurance claim form, et cetera. So something to think about considering your limits as a notary. And one of the things that you mentioned, Nicola, big thing is we're identifying a signer to make sure that we've got the right guy and to protect the document and the signer from fraud. So I want us to take a moment and talk specifically about proper identification, because right now, as Brooke, you mentioned, a lot of people are starting over. They may not have a valid identification document. And so we need to talk about the ways that notaries can identify signers, and even more specifically, what they do when a signer doesn't have an ID card, which is kind of the go-to. Nicola, actually, can you talk to us about this from a national perspective? Because, we don't just have notaries in California who are handling these transactions. I mean, my son, he lost his school in the fires. He's been virtually learning, and, when they're taking roll in class, it's like, oh, well, she's in Hawaii right now, or she's in Montana right now, or she went to her family's in Virginia right now. So there's people all over, they're displaced, and so this is a national issue.
From the standpoint of identification, most states allow a notary to identify someone using personal knowledge, where the notary knows them enough that they don't need to see their ID, and they vouch for their identity based on that. Unfortunately, here in California, that's not an option. The notary isn't allowed to use personal knowledge. When someone's lost their ID, they don't have it, they can't get it, like a situation where, or it got left somewhere and trying to evacuate, the law does have other options, the use of one or two credible witnesses, where that person who knows the signer is going to come in and vouch for their identity with an oath or affirmation.
Okay, so kind of a human ID.
A human ID, if you will.
Okay. If you need to know more about your state's laws when it comes to identification, of course, our website, nationalnotary.org, we have a whole area on our website dedicated to notary laws in every state. But let's zoom in on California. Brooke, can you talk to us about the specifics of how to identify a signer in California when they don't have an ID card?
Sure. And this is something that's going to be really important for notaries to be aware of, since there are a lot of people who had to evacuate with just the clothes on their backs. There is a solution for these folks. You can use one or two credible identifying witnesses. So if you have a circumstance where both the notary and the signer have a common friend or someone who can come in and vouch for the signer's identity, who's also personally known to the notary can identify the signer just by the oath or affirmation of that one credible witness. And the credible witness is going to have to swear to or affirm 5 specific pieces of information, that this individual credible witness knows the person who's there before the notary and can vouch for their identity, and that person is the same individual who's listed in the document. They need to swear to or affirm that that person doesn't have their ID and that it would be difficult or impossible for them to get one. And they also have to swear to or affirm that they are not in any way going to benefit from this transaction. They're completely impartial in the transaction. So whether a notary needs to use the oath or affirmation of one or two credible witnesses, that would be in a situation if the notary does not personally know someone who knows the signer, then you would have 2 credible witnesses who would have to swear to or affirm those 5 pieces of information related to the signer. So irrespective of whether it's 1 or 2, the notary is going to have to verify the identity of the credible witness or credible witnesses by examining their state-approved ID card.
Notaries, I want to speak to you for just a moment and let you know that when a signer contacts you to say they need something notarized, especially around this whole fire situation, it would be a great time to ask them a few questions. Do you have an ID card? If so, we need to see that when I show up for the notarization. If you don't have an ID card, we'll need that 1 or 2 credible witnesses, depending on the scenario, and that credible witness will need to bring in the ID. So very important that you as the notary make this as easy as you can on your signers by being prepared and planning ahead, communicating everything that might need to happen during that signing.
And if I can just add, it's also really important that the notary familiarize themselves with how they're going to document that in their journal that they use the credible witnesses, because the law in California also requires them to capture the signatures of the credible witnesses as well. But because they're serving as ID, they're actually going to sign in the ID section, which is not counterintuitive when you consider that you're used to signatures going in the signature spot. So something that a lot of people, because we don't use it very often, we forget that it's all part of the process.
Yeah, and it sounds so complicated, and sometimes it's like, why so many rules? But there's a very good reason for that, and that is protecting people from fraud.
Absolutely.
And that kind of leads me to my next topic, which is this is a time when people are going to be the most vulnerable to fraud. And there are a lot of vacant property land schemes going on out there right now. And this is, a prime spot for those scammers to really take advantage of people. And that's why, more than ever, we've got to stick to the law, and we've got to make sure things are properly documented, that people are properly identified. So, Brooke, can you speak to this a little bit more? You've got your hand on the pulse of what's going on out there.
Unfortunately, we've seen criminals capitalize on situations like natural disasters because they know that there's a lot of chaos and there's vulnerable people who are now exposed and in situations where they're under a great deal of stress. They may not be as careful or as mindful as they would be under more normal circumstances. So it's the prime environment for a criminal to come in and exploit that situation. So a few specific concerns that we are likely to see based on other disasters in the past: identity theft will be a major concern. So there is a lot of money involved in disaster cleanup. Criminals will likely be trying to get ID in another person's name or get their hands on vital records for purposes of stealing reimbursement checks, stealing insurance or federal emergency assistance funds. Also, it ties into document fraud in properties in the United States where there's either been an attempt or the criminal was successful in stealing property out from under someone through a chain of fraudulent documents, fake notarization to steal a property. So I would not be surprised if we unfortunately see similar fraud schemes on properties in the LA area. This is also a major concern right now because there are so many vacant properties currently in the affected area. The homes have been destroyed, and uninhabited properties in particular are a big target for criminals involved in deed fraud. So it will be very important across the board for notaries to be vigilant and ensure that they're following state laws and guidelines.
It's tough because you really want to help people, especially when they are struggling. And the other component that we don't think about when people are looking for notaries is they start with people they know. So as the notary, you might even be approached by someone that that you've known for years. And unfortunately, the people closest to us are usually the ones that ask us to break the laws the most, bend the rules because you know them. So do this thing for me because you know them. But it's actually in that realm that you have to be even more careful, because if it comes back, that's the first question they're going to ask is, what was the relationship between the notary and the signer? So never mind that, it happened in areas where the property values are extra high as well.
Right. Now, we've already talked about the importance of properly identifying signers, even if you know them. But we haven't talked about, first and foremost, personal appearance.
Right.
So what are the kinds of exceptions that people try to skirt around personal appearance?
So-and-so's in the hospital, or they're not feeling well today, and they really, today wasn't a good day, and they didn't want to get out of bed. So can we just notarize their signature? You know them. Let's call them on the phone, and they'll tell you that they signed. And there isn't a technology in California for a California notary that replaces that face-to-face appearance. So I know that there are folks offering resources, with online technology, but don't forget, there's a lot of mobile notaries that are willing to travel as well. So there's a lot of convenience factors that are available that we don't have to break any laws to accomplish.
Right, and we've heard from many mobile notaries who've said, I'm ready to help. They're advertising on their platforms and they're spreading the word. Many are offering their services even for free. They'll come to you and they'll make it easy for you. I mean, one of our friends, he lost all of his cars in the fire. So he doesn't even have a car right now.
Right.
So the idea of having a mobile notary that can come to you is super helpful. And where can we find notaries that can help us out?
First and foremost, the NNA has a website, findanotary.com. I know that there's a group of notaries that got together, the Helping Hand Notary Network. They put something together. And if all else fails, use Google.
Right, exactly. Now, you mentioned remote online notarization. California notaries are not allowed to perform remote online notarizations, but in other states, notaries have the authority to use specific vetted, state-approved platforms to do a notarization via audio-video technology.
Residents of California can use the technology, but they'll just have notaries from other states that are performing the notarization. So essentially having audio video communication, but they verify identification using a number of factors, whether it's knowledge-based authentication, actual credential analysis, holding your ID up to the screen, depending on the state and what the technology is. Mm-hmm. So that is a possibility for people, like you mentioned, that are out of state. But also, if you're in California, another state's notary can do it for you if you are, not able to leave the house, and a mobile notary coming to you just doesn't sound like a good thing for that day.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, we'd also like to take a moment to talk to our notaries who actually lost some stuff in the fires, who may have been impacted in some way. If you've lost your journal and seal, we want to talk to you about how you can report that and then replace those tools that you need to get on with your work. So, Brooke, do you want to talk to us about how they can go about replacing their journal or seal?
The good news for California notaries is the Secretary of State's office has made it very, very easy. There is a single form, fortunately, where you can download the form off the Secretary of State's website. And you can use that single form if you need to report lost or stolen seal, lost or stolen journal, if you need to provide a new mailing address. Many people who are unhoused right now or are not in their typical location, or their home may have been destroyed. So you can use this same form to provide a new mailing address. You can also request a certificate of authorization so that you can obtain a replacement seal. So, once you do this, you provide the form to them, you'll receive a certificate of authorization to obtain a new seal. So you'll provide that to your notary seal vendor, which is hopefully NNA. And we can manufacture a replacement seal for you and get you back on the road as quickly as possible.
And Nicola, you have some more good news. Nicola, how is the NNA going to help?
Well, if you purchased your seal and journal through the NNA, we actually will replace it for free. So make sure that you notify us that you'll be doing that. And then that certificate of authorization is going to be good for as many seals as you need manufacturers. And then the process usually takes the state about 5 business days, they say, to get it over. And then once we have it, the stamp can be manufactured. Because the NNA actually needs proof that you're a notary before we're able to manufacture the seal.
And that's what the certificate of authorization is for.
Yes.
Wow, we've touched on so many topics today when it comes to recovering from the devastation that we're looking at here in California right now. And so we hope that this has been helpful for you. Brooke, we just want to thank you so much for bringing your expertise and insight into today's conversation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Notaries, your role is extremely important in helping our community rebuild, and we want to thank you. While it is impossible to predict what the weeks and months of recovery will look like, we want to assure you that we here at the National Notary Association are committed to supporting you. And to the victims of this devastation, in the face of unimaginable loss and heartbreak, remember that your strength is greater than any disaster, and your resilience will guide you through this dark time. You are not alone. Your community, support networks, and spirit of courage will help you rise, heal, and rebuild.